Welcome to the webinar on leveraging data analytics for monitoring. We will talk about use of data analytics for monitoring, how analytics can help monitor compliance, and some of the practical considerations when monitoring commercial operations. I will be your host for this webinar, and I have the pleasure of inviting Michael O'Brien, former VP of Sales, Marketing, and Commercial Operations, Eisai USA, to be part of this webinar. Michael brings years of experience from the industry, and the focus of this webinar is around commercial operations, which is the area of his expertise and experience. So I'm very pleased that he has agreed to be part of this webinar and very excited to present this to you. Very quickly, my background. So I'm an associate partner and practice leader at qordata. I've been part of qordata for the last 4 years, and I've had an opportunity to speak to over 120 drug and device manufacturers in the last 3 or 4 years around their US and EU compliance management needs, as well as their analytical needs. I have had an opportunity to present over a couple of dozen webinars and I've spoken on several conferences and have had the pleasure of working with maybe some of you who are attending this webinar. Prior to joining qordata, I was a director at several pharmaceutical manufacturer firms, including Viat, Eisai, Otsuka, and Schering-Plough. And I also was a practice leader for SAP Americas. And as I said, I have the pleasure of having Michael O'Brien in this webinar. He is the president and founder of Pelton Coaching and Consulting. He's a certified executive coach, and he has advised and guided several Fortune 500 executives, entrepreneurs, and others who are making a difference at organizations like Brother International, J&J, and such. Michael specializes in leadership development, career transition coaching, executive coaching, and manager director training. He has been the former VP of Specialty Marketing and Sales Business Unit at Eisai Pharmaceuticals, as I mentioned. I want to give Michael an opportunity to quickly introduce his recent venture into being an author and some of his experiences in his 25 years of working experience at the pharma manufacturers. Michael, if you want to say hello, please.
Well, thank you, Ned. Thanks for having me this morning, and to everyone on the phone. It's a pleasure to be with you. As Ned mentioned, my whole career before I started my own executive coaching firm has been in the pharmaceutical and biospace, and I'm a big believer that as an industry we change lives, but in order to do so, we have to do it in the right way. We have to be excellent in our sales and marketing technical skills and expertise, but we also have to have a joint partnership with our compliance and our legal colleagues. I do believe that you can have excellent marketing and sales operations and do it in a way that's compliant to the world that we work in right now in 2018. As Ned mentioned, I left the industry in 2014 to really dedicate myself to helping leaders grow and develop. Obviously, I work with a lot of high-level sales and marketing leaders because they set the tone, and I still work with many within the pharmaceutical and bio industry. Again, all to try to create better lives out there for people who need the therapies that we come up with and innovate, but we have to do so in the right way. So I like to say that I actually help my sales and marketing leaders avoid getting hit by their SUV, and more on that in a little bit. You see the cover of the book, and I just learned before we got onto the webinar that Ned has a pretty cool offer for you at the end if you stay with us until the end. But my memoir, my best-selling memoir, Shift, is about what I call my last bad day. It was the day, actually, I was hit head-on by an SUV when I was out on my bike ride. And I share with the reader my recovery in basically 20 ways to move from human doer, and I was a really good human doer back before my last bad day, to more of a human being, so we can all sort of achieve that version of complete success. So that's our professional success, but also our personal success. All the external markers of success that we have, everything that our money buys us, but having the fulfillment and satisfaction and joy and happiness within. And I think we can have that. Sales and marketing people can work with compliance and legal people to create better tomorrows for all the patients that we serve. So Ned, thanks again for having me. I look forward to adding a pearl or two to your webinar today. And if there are any questions as we go through, to the audience, to the members on the phone, please pepper us with questions. Give the hard ones to Ned and hopefully the easy ones to me.
So thanks for that, Michael. But as you know, I'm the facilitator, so I'll get a chance to direct some of those questions. But yes, that's an excellent advice. So dear participants, do send your questions in. The moderator would be directing those questions to us, and we would love to make this more conversational so that when we get your questions in, we will address those as they come in. We, of course, have set aside time in the end as well to collect any remaining questions and address those. So as the topic suggests, this is what we would cover in the agenda. Background on compliance and commercial operations, why our focus on it today, a blueprint on leveraging data analytics for monitoring. We will share actual business cases on monitoring commercial operations, Q&A in the book offer that we will share with you at the end of towards the end of the webinar. So some of the takeaways that we promised, one of those is that we will try to explain how to distinguish between proactive and reactive compliance monitoring techniques. We will also help define the difference between triggers and key compliance indicators. If you are tracking down the path of automating your monitoring, these are some of the elements that you would benefit from by getting a better understanding, we feel. And then we will certainly share with you examples of sales and marketing dashboards around compliance monitoring. And I would look for Michael's input and feedback around the scenarios that we will share. So first I want to give sort of the business case as to why focus on compliance and commercial operations. From a sales and marketing compliance standpoint, compliance monitoring of sales and marketing activities remains a very important area. And the fact is that the financial implications and consequences of non-compliance can be extremely severe. For example, offering value to reward a pharmacy, a physician, or an institution to prescribe a particular drug is, of course, a violation of the anti-kickback statute, which all of you are very familiar with, I take, given that this is a webinar focused on compliance. And indeed, the penalties can include jail time, fines, and bans. A quick summarization of cases that are all centered around sales and marketing. So in 2010, Novartis settled a lawsuit for over $422 million to resolve liability over questionable activities relating to sales and marketing. In 2013, the US Department of Justice again sued Novartis, seeking over $3 billion. This case was again settled for $370 million, along with $20 million in forfeiture of proceeds from the scheme. And then lastly, in 2017, the DOJ again filed a lawsuit, again a QTAM lawsuit against Novartis for violating the False Claims Act. And the suit is where DOJ is claiming that fraudulent claims about product and off-label promotion was at play with Velturna. And again, just not to focus on one manufacturer, I have shared with you here very briefly several very severe cases in terms of penalties. For example, in 2009, Pfizer settled for around $2.3 billion in its case involving Bextra. In 2011, GSK settled for around $3 billion for off-label and improper marketing of drugs. And in 2013, J&J agreed to pay over $2.2 billion in criminal and civil fines to settle a Risperdal case alleging that where DOJ alleged that J&J improperly marketed the product to older adults, children, and disabled individuals. And just not to focus on large cases, even cases that involve several $1 million, such as the one for Par Pharmaceutical, around off-label marketing, Shire Pharmaceuticals, around their promotional practices, they have a heavy impact on the organization in several ways that all of you can appreciate. But not least of it is the fact that sales and marketing organizations spend lots of money in building their brand equity, in building their brand image, which gets tarnished when these types of heavy penalties are publicized in the market domain. And in summary, since September of 2012, in September of 2012, Public Citizens published that between 91 and 2012, over $30 billion had been paid by pharma industry to settle allegations of numerous violations. So hopefully the business case is very clear. A whole host of cases involving sales and marketing activities, promotions have resulted in several types of penalties and impacts to the organization. And today we would look to understand how can we monitor for these types of cases and scenarios, and how sales executives can contribute in better management to address challenges coming our way from a compliance standpoint. And then something not to be ignored, just late last year, OIG during a conference shared that compliance programs must involve meaningful monitoring as a key determinant in whether a compliance program is effective. And there is an indication that OIG will be looking at both spend data as well as several other data sets within the organization much more closely going forward, which was that's how as much was shared during that session. So with that, what I feel is that we in the compliance part of the business, as well as commercial part of the business, need to understand that the government is paying close attention to pharma and healthcare industry. Compliance monitoring is not a one-time activity, it's an ongoing program. Monitoring typically needs constant adjustment and updates as the industry, business needs, and technology changes. Today I'm going to ask Michael to help share the challenges that are inherent in sales and marketing and how he feels an organization can effectively manage those challenges to understand key risk areas, establishing best practices, building necessary governance and monitoring processes that can complement those business realities. So with that, I do want to share that, as I said earlier, Michael brings phenomenal experience of managing a very large team of account executives and a very large portfolio of products and revenue. What I would love to understand is how he helped balance the business demands of growing revenue, meeting budgetary goals, which are which is the day-to-day key activity in sales, hitting sales targets, motivating account executives, while keeping the staff in check with respect to off-label promotions, kickbacks, or any semblance of kickbacks, timely completions of compliance reports, expense reports, necessary trainings, etc. So Michael, if you could share maybe your overall view on how you help manage and balance compliance and commercial ops, that'd be phenomenal to dive into some of the business cases around this webinar today.
Sounds good, Ned. And so thank you again. So to answer your question around how did I do it, I'll give you a one-word answer. It's through conversation. In the slides that you just presented, heck, we could have a whole webinar on the companies that have gotten into trouble and have had to pay fines or damage their brand reputation just in pharma and bio. But we see this over the years across multiple industries, from the Enron case of yesteryear to what's happening at Nike today. There's a whole bunch of behavior by really leadership that's set the tone is set by leadership, that the win at all costs message. And as I mentioned earlier, we have to win, yes, because that's what a commercial organization, a publicly traded company has to do to satisfy their shareholders, but we have to win in the right way. And I think the best way to get there is through a better conversation. In today's society, we tend to, we're more tribal than ever, or at least our tribalism is seen more than ever. And as a nation, and really as a planet, we seem to be running to our tribal corners and just trying to outshout each other, thinking the person with the largest voice who shouts last wins the argument. And I see this also happening in companies. This is where the silos are built between sales and marketing even, and of course, sales, marketing, and compliance. We're all in our tribal corners at work, just trying to sort of outshout each other, right? Getting things done through force. We're not really listening to connect with one another or listening to understand, but rather we're just listening to reply, and we're talking past each other or over each other. So yes, as a sales and marketing executive, as a former one, and now someone who coaches these same people, there's a lot of pressure today to drive revenue, but we have to do it in the right way. You know, I often hear, and I know the people on the phone often hear, you know, sometimes compliance and sometimes our legal colleagues are seen as the sales prevention or marketing prevention group. Or you hear from a rep, do you want me to sell or do you want me to be an administrative expert? In today's world, we have to lose some of that language. It's just hyperbolic, and it does nothing to bring us together. It actually does a lot to build up those silos. So we need to start believing that we have to do both. To this account exec of 2018, they have to be really good at selling and being really good at the clinical message, which we'll talk about here in a bit. But they also have to be good with the administrative part of the job, where once before they could just be great at sales and maybe we would forgive a little bit more easily on their sloppiness with admin. That's no longer the case. So we have to hire a different account executive today than we did 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, or heck, even 5 years ago. And as a sales and marketing VP or as an executive, wherever you may find yourself, you have to lose the language that compliance and legal, and all joking aside, are not your sales prevention partners. They are here to help, you know, provide a compass, to provide a boundary so the company can win in the right way. I once had a former colleague, and he was, you know, he only stayed a colleague for a short period of time because he once said in a meeting, well, this is just the cost of doing business. Now, I don't know if I want to give him credit or not for actually just sharing publicly what I think, at least back in the day, some sales and marketing executives thought, but they would never share it publicly. That type of thinking can no longer exist in today's industry. There's too much risk in terms of brand reputation and our ability to actually do the work that we're set off to do. There's so many great innovations, but if we are not doing it in the right way, then those innovations can't get to the right patient. So we can't change lives. So how did I do it? Well, in a word, trying to have better conversation where all departments are listening to connect and understand with each other, and we co-create solutions so we can move together, as opposed to this sort of tribal listen to reply, trying to outshout each other type of approach that I don't think doesn't work anymore. Certainly doesn't work as well as it needs to work in 2018.
Michael, thank you. I appreciate that sort of background and primer on some of the approaches you took. Clearly, communication and common understanding sort of stands out in how you described it. Based on my little experience in supporting commercial organization, I felt that those situations were best managed where the various components, various stakeholders had an opportunity to understand, be listened out, and be able to contribute so that common understanding could be established. So with that, what I want to do next is go into some business cases and share those with you, Michael, and sort of look for your feedback. I'm going to take around 5 to 6 minutes just to get common understanding on how one can leverage data analytics for monitoring, and then I'll jump right into business cases, and Michael, look for your viewpoint and feedback on those business cases. All right, so for the attendees, I had promised to share a few of the concepts. First thing around data analytics. In today's world, visual analytics are very helpful for monitoring as well as managing any type of data. And certainly it applies to compliance. And I'll share with you examples where through visual analytics, you are able to identify compliance issues before they become problematic, That whole process broadly is what we've been describing as data analytics. One way around some of the automated monitoring techniques is staffing to monitor manually. But based on the conversations I've had with many of you and many in the industry, two challenges that staffing based monitoring runs into when they have very heavily staffed monitoring program. One is the constant funding challenge, and the second one is the resource retention challenge, where some of the best business rules and learning sometimes are lost because it's not that easy and effective to transition knowledge from one person to another, and that challenge continues to be a challenge on the monitoring side of things. So three concepts, data analytics that I just shared. Data alerts are mechanisms that are created by leveraging access into data and into the data repositories, where key compliance indicators are the goals that define what data alerts are checked, and they help monitor those compliance issues. Let me give you a quick example. For instance, one of the compliance concerns that you might have is that when there is a significant delay in submission of expenses, you are beginning to observe that some of the violations of state rules are creeping up. So one mechanism to avoid that as a key compliance indicator would be timely submission of expenses. And then you can set a data alert that anytime account executive is past certain number of days in submitting their expense report, an alert comes up, and you can then set certain thresholds when that alert turns into a report, a visual data analytics for your organization to look at and take action. So what I hopefully described for you is key compliance indicator, as well as a data alert that's a component of that KCI. And we will go through some more examples, so hopefully that becomes clear. In setting up KCIs, what I recommend is to set up a very simple workshop, and you may want to start with just a handful, half a dozen key compliance indicators. The criteria is very simple. You decide what you want to monitor. That's, of course, is dependent on your specific organization, your specific compliance team's priorities, and then based on those indicators, you set the necessary alerts. How do you find and create key compliance indicators? You can look at spending patterns. You can look at amounts that are exceptionally high or low. You can look at frequency of activity or other risk determinants. You can also look at historical data, that of your own organization, to set limits, ranges, or anomalies, or you can compare against industry data to set those benchmarks. And certainly KCIs can be set up to help make sure that you meet your CIAs and other guidelines. There are several types of monitoring analytics or monitoring compliance indicators. You can look for outliers, you can monitor activities, you can even look at stakeholder analysis around executive briefings. You can look at questionable actions in the past, and that can help you create compliance indicators, competitive analysis, and benchmarking against historical and industry that I said. I'm going to skip this slide. This is, but I'll welcome if anybody has questions. This is more of a brass tacks on how and what components and pieces need to be assembled for, in my recommendation, an effective compliance indicator program that is automated. But bottom line is, for going back to the topic of commercial operations, the first question you need to ask is, what do you really need to monitor? What's your priority? And then the second question is, what details you want to have be available to you to make that information actionable when those indicators are triggered. If you can answer those two questions, you are in a good spot to start setting up your automation around monitoring. And then I'll close out by one example. So here is an example where I have set up three key compliance indicators. One is that if there's a spend of over $50 for a meal, I want to know that. Second one is around speaker events. if there are less than 5 attendees for an event, and for a given speaker, if 40% of his or her events have less than 5 attendees, I want to know that as soon as that happens. And third thing is delayed expense that I already talked about. So these would be proactive scenarios where you are looking to catch in the example in the top right, those situations where the speaker programs are not as effective, and you want to avoid any semblance of a program that may be questioned for its legitimacy. And again, you decide what is the right number. Maybe less than 2 attendees. Maybe it's not just attendees. Maybe it's HCPs, and so forth. So these are examples where once you set the alerts, the data is constantly monitored every day. And as soon as that trigger is hit, you are alerted to it. You can then pick and choose any of those alerts to go and look at the detail as you visually select. So in this example, I am selecting this scenario of delayed expense. As soon as I select it, it takes me to the detail and shows me the situations that have caused that trigger to be hit. So with that, I'm going to now switch to business cases, and I'm eager to get Michael involved and really learn from his experience in the industry. Just 2 more data points before I dive in. One is there's a lot of monies being exchanged between manufacturers and physicians. This is the aggregated amount over last 4 years, around $34 billion available to us from the transparency data, around 52 million transactions. In EU, that amount for the first year was around $6 billion. So clearly that's a very, very large sum of money. And then just internally from a commercial standpoint, scripts in 2016 amounted to $398 billion across 4.5 billion transactions. So hopefully, and hopefully you can see there's a very large list of illustrative data around which all this information resides, and that prompts the necessity for automated monitoring, because it I feel is nearly humanly impossible to effectively monitor the volume and the large data sets that are in the public and private domain today, as Michael called the big data scenario. So Michael, I want to get you engaged very quickly. What I want to do is share with you a scenario. This is from earlier this year, effective January 15, 2018. New Jersey has instituted a new regulation. That regulation dictates that there is a $10,000 a year cap on payments to physicians across all pharma manufacturers, drug and device, except research and education related payments. This is something new. There was never such a cap in New Jersey in the past. The second constraint is that there's a $15 meal cap for meals related to all activities. And then thirdly, there's a $0 gift restriction. What I have for you on the right-hand side, top right-hand side, is just a quick summary that in the year 2017, around $6 million were spent across New Jersey, across 18,000 transactions, with an average of $325 per transaction. So from a pretty significant level of activity, how do you quickly and effectively coach and guide your team to change their operational behavior and maintain some of the goals and targets you have for sales revenue in New Jersey? So Michael, would love to hear your perspective. I know I'm throwing a challenge for you to address, but I would love to hear how in the field you manage these types of situations.
Yeah, no problem, Ned. So I actually look at this as a good thing. I know that might sound crazy. A lot of times we look at these changes through a lens of scarcity in terms of loss, right? Because we once could do something, now we can't. But I actually think this levels the playing field, which I'm excited about because it gives me a platform to talk to my account executives and my managers about leading with our clinical message. I remember back in the day when the pharma code first came out, there was a lot of like big kerfuffle about that, a lot of angst and worry about like, what's this going to do? But we found a way to win in the right way. We stopped making it all about pens and Post-it pads and coffee mugs and all this jazz. And it allowed us actually to compete on a clinical foundation. So I love this right now. Hopefully how we would work it is we would know about this new law coming down the road far upstream, so I could work with my team, I could work with compliance to make sure everyone was really educated, that we can, swing the pendulum into the right direction. But again, I look at this as a good thing. Too often, too many account managers out there, sales leaders, marketing professionals, want to argue with reality. Here's the thing: on January 15th, 2018, there was a new reality in the state of New Jersey. Worrying about it, fretting about it, wishing we didn't have it, right, is not a good way of using our energy. It doesn't necessarily drive us forward. So the faster we can actually shift into the new reality, the better off we can be. One way to do that is shift your lens, or go into the ophthalmologist, right? As they flip, that little contraption, is it better like this or better like that? So things can always look better through a lens of abundance as opposed to a lens of scarcity. Now, in terms of our sales goals, let's be honest, our sales numbers aren't going to change. We have an overall number to go after. So again, this levels the playing field, so it doesn't become, coffee mugs and floral arrangements or crazy lunch and learns. It becomes about how well are these account execs at delivering the clinical message and helping our HCPs identify the right patient for the right product. That, at the end of the day, wins every day. And that's how we provide value long-term in this industry, at least from my humble opinion.
Michael, I appreciate it. Hopefully our attendees are getting value out of it. So if your sales team is complaining that they have to alter and there needs to be an adjustment, you just heard from a very experienced hand that Michael feels, given that it's a level playing field for all the manufacturers, so some of these situations might actually allow your account executives to focus more on the clinical side of the messaging. But Michael, $15 meal cap, I don't know of too many places where you can get a meal for $15. I don't know about you.
Well, actually, I have a couple, and I would have to say the people that probably are most upset about this new law in New Jersey are all the caterers that cater to pharma and Panera. But there's a beautiful place, Ned, I'll take you to it. It's down on the Jersey Shore. It's called Surf Tacos. They have a beautiful vegetarian taco or vegetarian burrito rather. They also have a taco that's like $7. You can add a drink, call it $8. You still have $7 left. So I think one can eat really well under $15. And again, all apologies to anyone who's in the catering industry. They're probably having the most angina from this new law than any pharmaceutical company should. Again, my opinion.
Fair. So maybe I would look for you to, if when you get a chance, start assembling a small list of those places. That may come in handy for some of your colleagues.
Yeah,
Right,
you can download the list on my website, right? So yes.
Excellent. All right. So I thought this was a curveball, but I appreciate how well you were able to address it. Let me see if I can find slightly bit more complex scenarios to share with you. All right. And just by the way, let me just quickly share some of this content again came from the data sets that I have access to by the way of my monitoring analytics. So I have access to spend by state. I went in there, looked at the information that I transposed for our participants onto the slide. But again, I have the opportunity to go dive deeper, select a given year, look at transactions, maybe see those scenarios where account execs in our organization have been spending heavily, they might be the first ones in the training and coaching class around this discussion. So, Michael, I want to dive next into a situation that is focused on account execs. I worked hard to find these cases and share them with you. The first case that I'm going to share is around an account executive, Walker Paul. So here is the situation with Walker. As I look through his information, Walker has conducted around 180 events. In those 180 events, the participation from HCPs, represented by the blue pie, is very low. It's around 1.1%, nearly 1%. And also the spend of nearly $39,000 is heavily on employees and HCP staff, but very little, nearly none, on HCPs. If this is a KCI where participation by HCP is below a certain threshold, comes up on my dashboard radar, and you as the as a sales lead, I am engaging you as my stakeholder to take a look at it and sort of give me your perspective on what you're seeing. If you can take this up, I'll appreciate it.
Well, so Ned, so this might be a KCI, but it's also an HS, like it's a head scratcher. There's probably a couple other acronyms I might want to add, but we'll keep it PG-13. So when I look at this, it doesn't make much sense at all, right? So obviously the data is the data. So I get really curious very quickly to formulate a good conversation with Walker Paul. You know, from the data, you can see very clearly, and I love the visual, right? So we get so much data in the industry, and many of the sales and marketing leaders out there are visual learners, or, you know, visual in terms of their analytical ability. So a program where you only have 4 HCPs over the course of a whole bunch of events, and it looks like a whole bunch of employees, I wonder what's happening, right? So I would want to obviously engage my compliance partners in a conversation, and, you know, together holistically try to dive into what Walker may be doing or maybe not doing in his territory. You know, is this an administrative error, or is there something more significant going on? But certainly a graphic like this, a chart like this, definitely has me scratching my head. And I would want to dive in and start working with his leadership team in terms of what may be going on, so we can get some answers rather quickly, so we can course correct the behavior if we need to course correct the behavior.
Fair. Yeah, and to your point, it may simply be an administrative situation where the HCPs are not properly getting tagged on the expense report, or it may be something more severe where Walker has been spending more time coaching the employees and is not noting the HCP who was there when the lunch and learn or the event took place. So let me move to another case, again around account executive. This time I'm looking at Larry Sanchez, and in Larry's case, the level of attendance by HCPs is better. It's close to 75%. I would expect and love to see a better percentage than that, but still it's much better than Walker's case. And also, as I look at the spend, I have a concern that a very small percentage of the $24,000 that Larry Sanchez has spent, around 7%, is on HCPs. So when you look at it, I would love to hear your initial reaction and how you would go about evaluating the situation.
Sure thing, Ned. So I share your concern, and I think the important thing to underline with all the data points is that we still need to be curious, right? So in today's world where the pace is frenetic and it's easy to get into fight flight mode, we can get a little bit hyperbolic and just react. So it's important to just connect with our breath and actually just read through the report. So here's what I see is I actually start with a pie chart on the right, the blue and green one. So I am, concerned, curious about why Larry has so many programs, almost 21%, that doesn't include an HCP. So that without HCP green slice of it, I'm curious about that. And I'm also curious about how that's driving the overall spend. So going to the pie chart on the left, that red or bright orange section. So again, much like the one with Walker previous, I want to dive into it. I want to work with my compliance partners, but this is something that I would expect his or her district sales manager, regional director, depending on what level this is at, to start investigating this sooner rather than later, right? So there are 67 events. That's more than a month's worth. So hopefully with good compliance hygiene, we're monitoring these things each month, each quarter, so we can stay ahead of the curve and hopefully cut off at the pass any potential issues that would grow bigger if we, say we have our head in the sand, if you will.
So very quickly, I want to go to this another case where we have Jerome Frija. He has 100% HCP participation. So I feel a model account exec in terms of the goals of getting HCPs engaged, and your quick reaction to this visual, Michael.
Yeah, so thanks, Ned, for this. So this is something that I'd like to see. So Jerome has all his programs with HCPs. He's got a number of programs, as you can see by the bottom, 245. So I love this. This is where we want to be spending our time, keeping in mind that HCPs have a lot of staff. Certainly some geographic areas have a ton of staff. So the percent actually is within my range of expectations, right? About 77% of the staff to the HCP. I would want to actually measure that against other people in the district/region. Is this an outlier in a good way, maybe in a not so good way? But looking at the full pie chart on the right, a beautiful pizza pie of everything being focused in with HCPs as far as events. So certainly that's what I would like to see with Jerome. And who knows, it could be a potential opportunity for Jerome to be a good mentor to his peers in the local community.
Phenomenal. And as you just called out, Michael, again, the one fact that's available with these dashboards, that even though they are presenting to you information summarized in the manner you just described, there is an opportunity for anyone who wants to dive deeper and do more detailed analysis. So all the transactions and all the events that drive it are available. You can benchmark that against other account execs, and you can certainly draw any of the best practices and learnings by doing so. So I'm keeping a quick watch on time. We have around 15 more minutes. I want to give folks a chance to ask questions, and I also want to have some time left for us to talk a bit more about your experience and your motivation to move into coaching and guidance and your authorship. So I'm going to go through one more case, if I may, Mike, and then we will dive into some of those coaching aspect. Excellent. So I'm switching to an example that's actually based on actual result set. So this is a chart which on the y-axis is listing the total amount of scripts that were written by a physician. Each dot represents a physician. So I'll take an example over here. So in this dot, what you're looking at is an HCP who wrote around 1.5 million prescriptions, and Insys spent around $400,000 in spend on that physician. The orange dots are outliers based on the KCI, or key compliance indicator criteria, we had created. And so this physician hits that criteria by exceeding a certain threshold in prescriptions and a certain threshold in spend. The truth of the matter is that OIG had in fact identified this physician And this became one of those 4 or 5 handful of physicians that they further investigated, and that resulted in severe penalties. For instance, where there was this perspective that OIG thought of these as violations around kickbacks regulation. So I want to give you further details on this. Gordon Friedman received that much, around $400,000 in spend and around 1.6 million of scripts that he wrote. And then as you look at industry data, which I have access to, what you would see is that the rest of the industry only spent $8,000 on Gordon Friedman. So given that context, this became more alarming, and this then became a case that was investigated. If you were to receive this type of report before any type of inspection or investigation is done, interested to hear your perspective, how you would see it, how you would react to it, and any guidance you can provide to us and the participants would be helpful.
Yeah, no problem, Ned. Well, I would say I'd put Gordon in the same category as those New Jersey caterers that we talked about on a couple slides before. The gravy train is about to end. And this report is so helpful to look at these outliers. Now, as a executive in sales and marketing, I'd want to partner with my, executive in compliance to make sure I have a view of this. So again, it doesn't go so far downstream, right? So this behavior was something that you could probably pick up if you're looking at this, like at minimum once a quarter. So yeah, he is such a far outlier. It's good that, ISIS was, sort of the data led to this capture, because this is something that would be highly concerning. And it goes beyond just the clinical information sharing that I talked about earlier. So if our products are truly innovations and we can sit with our doctors and talk about the clinical benefits of our meds and the right patients to get them, this type of behavior no longer has a place. I would argue it shouldn't have had a place way back when, but we know what happened back then, but current day, and this type of practice is clearly no longer acceptable. And it doesn't do anything to actually help build the reputation of the pharmaceutical industry.
Appreciate that feedback. So bottom line is, this is something that would trigger quick action on your part as a sales executive. You will partner with your compliance colleague to look closely at it. But to your point, you also want the opportunity to have this type of information be available in a timely manner. So with that, what I would like to do is dive into questions that our participants have. And again, if you want to email those questions in, I will be happy to respond to those questions that are directly addressed to me, and the ones that are addressed to Michael, I will send those to him and then send you the responses. So encourage you to send in those questions. I have received a couple of questions around HCP definition. I do need a bit more time to sort of dive into that definition aspect, and I will get back to the participant on that question. What I want to do is for all the participants to share with them a book offer. The offer is that if you would like to purchase Michael's book, and I will give Michael a chance to share some of the summary on what he has written. There's a 50% discount offered by qordata, and without further ado, I want to give Michael a chance to share. I do want to call one thing out, that Michael provides all the profits from his book to help girls with mobility, but I'll let Michael describe it in a much more eloquent manner rather than I attempting. So Michael, over to you.
Thank you, Ned. So this was, to everyone listening, this was a pleasant surprise as I dialed in for the webinar. Ned wanted to make this offer on behalf of qordata. So my memoir, Shift, is a best-selling memoir on Amazon, and it's around my last bad day, the day that I got hit head-on by a Ford Explorer when I was out on a bike ride. I was actually at one of our pharmaceutical sales and marketing meetings in New Mexico, And when I wrote it, it was about the message that we can overcome whatever challenges may be in front of us with the proper mindset, with the right perspective, the right type of partnership, that we are overall just better together. And since it was about that message and not about making money, I decided to give all the proceeds to an organization based in Chicago called World Bicycle Relief. And they help mainly girls, but also boys as well, and women and men conquer the challenge of distance in countries like Kenya and Malawi and Zaire and Zimbabwe and some parts of Southeast Asia and also in South America. So every book that's sold actually helps build a bike. And so for the school age girls, they get to a point where they actually have to think about dropping off out of school. And when they do, they marry earlier, they have bigger families, and they lose their independence. So what World Bicycle Relief does, works with districts, their village school, so that 6-kilometer walk each way on foot to school now becomes just a short bike ride. And they stay in school, they graduate, they marry later, they have smaller families, and they have more economic vitality. So my memoir, My Last Bad Day, helps create better days for other people halfway around the world. And I'm a big believer that if you change a life anywhere, you change lives everywhere. And so Ned and qordata has been really gracious in saying, hey, if you buy a copy through my website, they'll pick up half the cost and you'll still make the donation to WBR. So as I mentioned earlier at the top of the webinar, in the last chapter, I do help the reader go from human doer to human being. So when we're present, because I believe if we're present and we're showing up as our full selves, we can make better decisions. We can partner better with our sales and marketing colleagues and our compliance colleagues, and we can do more goodness, if you will, in this industry. So I hope it's of interest to some people, and what people tell me, it's a page turner. So Ned, thanks again for giving Shift an opportunity to get in the hands of some other people.
Absolutely, Michael. Appreciate it. So again, participants, here is the information. You can go to michaelobrienshift.com, use the promo code qordata, and that would give you 50% off the list price for both hardcover as well as paperback. So with that, I have received around half a dozen questions. Some of those questions are around the content of the graphs. I will make sure that I address and respond to each of those questions back. I feel some of these questions are more specific and to particular graphs, but I want to summarize one or two of them for the rest of the participants. So there's a question on how and why some of the data points on the spend versus script chart were selected, what criteria was used. I didn't share with you the underlying compliance indicator creation column. I will provide that in my response, and I will ask the moderators to actually send that response to all the participants in case these questions are coming up in other people's minds. And again, with that, I do want to call out and appreciate Michael for being very gracious in sharing his experiences and his learnings and offering his coaching to us in this session. Michael, like always, I feel each time I have this session with you, I learn from you, so appreciate that. I did try to bring new and more challenging cases. I feel those weren't too difficult for you, so rest assured, I'll keep working on it. I want to get to a point where you say, I'm not sure how to address it. I know I'm not there yet. But again, thank you for your commentary. I appreciate your guidance on a place where I can have a nice, inexpensive lunch. I'll look for some of those additional locations from you. And I want to give you a chance to say a few words before we wrap up, Michael.
Well, Ned, thanks for the kind words. Always good to partner with you. And going back to our days when we were in Farmer together and now, and to everyone on the phone, hopefully there was a pearl or two in it that you can take back to your companies so you can be better together tomorrow than you are today. And yes, Ned, so we'll go hit Surf Taco in New Jersey. I'll buy you a really good veggie burrito down there. And if people have questions offline in terms of how to translate the language of sales and marketing executives, and they want to get me, they can certainly go to my website or just send me an email, which I know is sort of in the webinar notes. Be happy to help, because everyone on this phone call, this webinar, and Ned, yourself included, I know we show up every day trying to improve people's lives, and that's a really great profession, a really great legacy to leave behind, because if you don't have your health, you would trade almost anything for it. So again, thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for everyone on the phone for joining, and I hope everyone has a beautiful Thursday and a great weekend ahead.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone. This will end our webinar. Thanks a lot. Bye.